and it's magnificent. They, go back into the files and pick out little Ed Sullivan, smiled at millions every Sunday night. But in 1955, something happened that made him snap. Changed rock and roll history. Ed Sullivan came into the world on September 28, 1901, as one half of a zot of twins in Harlem, New York. His twin brother, Daniel, was sickly from birth and survived only a few months. Ed was left as the only surviving twin, carrying a loss that created a shadow over his childhood. Even as a boy, heffled an emptiness, a quiet sadness that shaped him. His parents, Peter and Elizabeth, were Irish and had a big family. Ed was the third of 8 children, but only 5 survived infancy. The house was full of life and grief at the same time. When Ed was just 5, another tragedy hit. His baby sister died, breaking the family's heart again. Elizabeth couldn't stand the pain anymore. She decided they would leave Harlem and move to Portchester, a small town north of the city. Portchester was calmer and more peaceful. Ed's parents hoped the change would help them heal, but the losses never really left him. Even as a young boy, Ed learned to live with sadness. Despite this, Ed survived, and people often called him the miracle child. Born into a neighborhood where Irish and Jewish families lived side by side, he grew up surrounded by different cultures and music. Cars began replacing horse-drawn carriages, and Ed took it all in. Though he was one of 8 children, only 5 lived past infancy. Every day was a reminder that life was fragile. His parents held him close, especially his mother. To them, he was higher miracle. In the house, grief was never far away, but music helped. The Sullivans sang together around the piano, filling the rooms with sound. Music was their way of coping. It was a habit that would stay with Ed forever. Even years later, as a famous television host, he would remember those early days and how a song could make hard things feel lighter. As he grew older, Ed also began to show his need for control. In high school, he was a star athlete. Between 1916 and 1919, he earned 12 athletic letters. On the football field, he was a tough halfback on the basketball court, a quick guard, on that track, a fast sprinter, but it was baseball where he truly shined, a catcher and captain. These sports shaped him. They built his discipline and showed him how to lead. And he loved to lead. Ed was captain of the baseball team, telling his teammates where to stand and how to play. Championship-ed, and so did his reputation. That role gave him a sense of authority, something that would matter even more in his career. At 17, when America joined World War I, Ed ran away to Chicago to try to enlist in the Navy. But he was too young and had no papers, so they sent him home. That failed attempt showed his boldness. It also pushed him toward a different path. By then, Ed had also discovered writing. At school, he wrote sports columns and edited the school newspaper. Right after graduation, the Portchester Daily Item hired him. They paid him $1 per article, and Ed loved every bit of it. It was the start of his journalism career, one that would take him to the Hartford Post, the New York Evening Mail, the Associated Press, and eventually the New York Evening Graphic. Sports and writing had always been his passions, and they prepared him for a much bigger stage. Sports also taught Ed about fairness. Growing up, he played alongside black athletes without thinking much about it. It felt natural to him. When he traveled to Connecticut for games and met teams with black players, he never thought it was strange. That belief in equality stayed with him. Later, when he had his own television show, Ed Sullivan would give black performers a platform even when other hosts would not. Ed Sullivan thought moving to the Hartford Post in 1919 would be a big career jump. Coming from the Portchester Daily Item, he hoped for new opportunities at a larger paper, but that plan fell apart almost immediately. Within his very first week on the job, the Hartford Post folded, leaving him unemployed before he even had time to settle in. It was a strange and unlucky setback, especially since newspapers were thriving at that time. Papers rarely shut their doors after just a few days. Sullivan had to look for work all over again, realizing how unpredictable the newspaper world could be. Even so, this did not slow him down. Instead, it made him more determined to keep going. That quick and painful lesson shaped his drive and resilience early on. When the Hartford Post failed, Sullivan managed to pick himself up and joined the New York Evening Mail as a sports reporter. But in 1923, that paper also shut down. This began a rough period where he bounced from one failing whisper to another. From 1923 to 1927, he moved between the Associated Press, the Philadelphia Bulletin, the Morning World, the Morning Telegraph, the New York Bulletin, and the Leader. Every time one paper went under, he had to look for a new position. This was a tough cycle, and most people would have quit. Sullivan simply refused to give up. Each job became a chance to improve his skills and grow his network. Though it was exhausting and uncertain, it showed his true passion for journalism. The years at the Associated Press were especially important. The AP was one of the most respected news organizations in the world. even though Sullivan kept freelancing with other papers like the Philadelphia Bulletin and the Morning Telegraph. Working at the AP gave him national stories and more serious. This period lasted until 1927, and Sullivan learned to report on everything from sports to breaking news. Even in the middle of constant job changes, he built a solid reputation as someone who could adapt and deliver strong stories. By the time he left the AP, he had proven himself as a capable reporter. That same year, Sullivan took his next big step. In 1927, he joined the New York Evening Graphic as a sports writer. The Graphic was loud and flashy, with a reputation for bold, often scandalous stories. Sullivan thrived there and moved up quickly. Soon, he was sports editor, which was his first stableship role. The Graphic was also where he met Walter Winchell, one of the most famous gossip columnists of the time. When Winchell left for the Daily Mirror in 1929, Sullivan became the Graphic's Broadway columnist. That column introduced him to the world of show business and gave him a new kind of influence. The Graphic folded in 1932, but by then Sullivan was already a name people knew. In 1932, he became the Broadway columnist for the New York Daily News. That was when he began his famous column, Little Old New York. For 42 years until 1974, readers checked it every day. Sullivan wrote about Broadway shows, famous actors, and the secret lives of the city's biggest stars. People loved his voice because it was fair, sharp, and always inside the action. A single mention from Sullivan could make someone famous overnight. His column was syndicated too, so readers outside of New York could follow the drama. Year after year, Sullivan adapted every new twist in the entertainment world. That's what kept him at the top. Sullivan was also a talent scout. Little Old New York was more than just gossip. It was where new actors and performers got their big break. Sullivan knew how to recognize talent before anyone else. One kind word in his column could jumpstart a career. On the other hand, if he didn't like someone, a quick mark could ruin a reputation. Actors and producers checked his column every morning because they knew one line could decide the future of their show. Sullivan wasn't just reporting the news, he was shaping it. Outside the newspaper offices, you could see him at all the big parties and theater openings. Wherever something happened, Sullivan was there. But the nightlife of New York was its own battleground. Sullivan set up shop at the famous El Morocco Club. That became his unofficial headquarters across town. His rival, Walter Winchell, held court at the Stork Club. Both men fought for attention in these glitzy spots where movie stars and politicians spent their nights. Every famous facet that walked through the doors was part of the contest. Winchell's store was famous for its strict door policy and exclusive crowd. Sullivan's El Morocco was famous for its glamour and its power. Between them, these two columnists ruled New York's nightlife, and everyone felt their rivalry. It became one of the most talked-about stories in the city. Being seen at either club could make or break a reputation, and Sullivan wasn't satisfied with just writing. Like Winchell, he decided to conquer radio, too. In 1932, he launched his first radio show, The Ed Sullivan Show, on CBS. That show brought him new listeners and big-name guests like Jack Benny and George M. Coo, and Sullivan kept going, hosting Ed Sullivan Variety in 1941. Ed Sullivan Entertains from 1943 to 1944, and Ed Sullivan's Pipelines in 1946. Each show brought his name into more homes. Radio was perfect for him. It gave him a bigger audience and a quicker way to share showbiz gossip. People began to trust him as a voice they could recognize. Radio proved that he could do more than write. In 1948, CBS decided to take a big chance. They hired Ed Sullivan to host their new Sunday night variety show called Toast of the Town. Sullivan was a newspaper columnist with no TV experience. Marlo Lewis, one of CBS's producers, thought Sullivan's plain style might work. Sullivan wasn't sure. "Everything they're promising to do is something I've already done," he joked. The first episode aired on June 20, 1948, with a tiny budget of $170. Even Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were paid just $200 to appear. Sponsors were scared. Executives worried he wasn't flashy enough, but CBS boss William Paley believed in him. Sullivan fought to get top guests and shaped the show into a success that lasted more than 20 years.